Hello and welcome to ESG Talk, your go to source for insights and advice from leaders in environmental, social, and governance. I'm your host, Steve Soter, filling in for Mandy McReynolds. On today's episode, we're joined by Steve Manocchio to discuss the financial impact of ESG. Steve serves as the head of global financial compliance and risk management at Cisco. He's the driving force behind strategic financial reporting, regulatory compliance, and risk oversight, and he collaborates seamlessly with Cisco's Office of the CFO. Recently, Steve joined us at Amplify 2023 on a roundtable that discussed how the evolving ESG regulatory landscape is affecting internal audit, and we are delighted to have him here with us on ESG Talk. Steve, welcome to the show.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here with you.
Well, to kick things off, I want to talk about why reporting on climate and ESG alone isn't sufficient. So, in your words, why is it important to give context and tell the whole story?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I viewed it like as a cultural shift. The concepts and theories around climate, sustainability, social responsibility, if you think about it, they're not all that new. We've been talking about those areas as a humanity and, for decades, we've been wrangling these matters. The way that we look at it at Cisco and, just as a point of reference, Cisco has been voluntarily reporting a number of these metrics and these points for well over 20 years. But the company and I think humanity as a large has to view this as really one community, one planet with one objective, really to get to those, better state environments and a metric and goals that we all want to achieve. I think the connected tissue of working together as people, organizations, and governments is going to be absolutely critical for us to impact change in this area. So, when you think about the reporting aspect of it, I think it's important that we're moving towards more transparent reporting to various stakeholders. But the reporting alone isn't the story. It's how we as a society are moving towards achieving these goals for a better future for us all and our children.
One of the things that I think about, former financial reporting practitioner, is the role of assurance. And I'm certain that that's been high on your list of things that you've been thinking about recently. In a survey conducted by Workiva and PwC in March of this year, the survey found that almost all, or at least 96% of the executives who responded, stated that they would proceed with independent assurance, whether it was required in the final SEC climate disclosure ruling or not, which certainly speaks to the value of ESG reporting just beyond regulation. And I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the main reasons that you think organizations seek ESG assurance? And maybe what's the deeper motivation behind that than to simply satisfy with some regulatory requirement?
The view that I would have is to truly impact change. I believe transparency and trust around how organizations are making a meaningful progress towards meeting their relevant goals or objectives is absolutely critical. For us at Cisco and for me, it comes down to trust in the people, trust in the process, trust in the technology that supports the reporting of climate and other ESG metrics. If you think about what trust has been defined as, you can Google it, look it up, but it's loosely defined as like a firm belief, like in the reliability and the truth and the ability to, in the strength of someone or something. So if we truly believe like we're going to elevate, I believe, the value proposition of Cisco's products and our services, there's an expectation that our stakeholders have that the information we're providing them is reliable and it's complete and it's accurate. But moreover, I think when you look at the custodians of any organization, whether it's the CEO, CFO, board members, the bar is equally higher, if not, that they expect that same level of comfort internally, regardless of whether a regulator is out there or other parties are out there, to ensure that the organization is doing the right thing and doing the things that we set out to do. And so for me, that assurance quotient from a regulator or other government body is a good step forward, but the value proposition for our customers and our stakeholders, and of course, our internal custodians of the organization is even higher for that level of reliability.
And Cisco's been doing this for a long time. But speaking broadly, then, do you feel like that is maybe one of the key opportunities facing ESG teams and organizations generally, is to close maybe a trust gap, if I can use that term? I mean, do you think that's kind of the next step that we're looking at here?
100%. Trust is going to be the currency of tomorrow, really, as we see it. And the trust gap with organizations that are providing products and services to consumers, needs to be bridged. And that bridge is not just going to extend from organizations such as Cisco, but all the providers that we procure services from, whether it's airlines, whether it's raw materials, whether it's, organizations that make component parts. The extension of trust kind of now leaves the four walls of Cisco and our organization. It really extends much more broad across the ecosystem. So as I think about why can I trust the information from my utility provider, for example, in a foreign country that's the exact number of wattage I used, or why can I trust that this mineral was used to, create this component part, and in the process of transforming that mineral into a component had this much consumption on it. These are questions that we're going to have to analyze and wrangle, but the trust quotient is broad reaching at this point, and garnering that trust is something that is going to require a foundational shift in my mind on how organizations provide that assurance back to their constituents, and how other parties such as public accounting firms and other bodies such as regulators and the like kind of help implement control points and process, procedure, and otherwise to help elevate the trust quotient for those organizations.
Well, I love that. And I love that you brought up that foundational shift and that you brought up accounting, because that's actually where I want to go next. Accountants have traditionally been, of course, all about finance, all about historical reporting. Certainly, they've got a lot of rigor in processes, and that's been the case for many, many decades. But what's really interesting to me is how they've stepped into this new role with respect to ESG, where they're really helping to drive, it seems like to me, meaningful changes and impact, driving impact in ESG initiatives. And so I would love to hear from you. How have accountants positioned themselves to enhance ESG efforts within their organizations? And then also bridged the ESG implications on the financial results and the financial implications.
Yeah, I was in public accounting for well over 20 years, and the one thing I learned that maybe I didn't actually take away when I went to college was accountants are foundationally historians. That's what they are. Accountants have a unique skill to tell the story, the history, what happened. And if you stop and you think about it, it's so analogous to like how we've written books about wars or events. It's someone telling the history of something, and that's what accountants do really well, and that's what they do. And why do you rely on it? Because the way and the methodologies accountants have evolved over time to give comfort over the completeness and the accuracy and the validity of that information they're recording historically is a skill set, and there's methodologies that's evolved to kind of help strengthen the reliability of what they're reporting. Think about the analytical skills, that an accountant comes with, and the risk and controls mindset that accountants come with. They fine-tune those. And you think about Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, well over 20 years ago, the level of acumen that the accounting profession elevated around risk and controls and reliability of data, and a multiplier effect on that level. And we've had 20 years in the accounting profession to kind of really fine tune that. And I think all of those skills holistically become extremely relevant in this area, and connecting the tissue back to, the financial implications, which of course is the core bread and butter of what, accounting truly is doing.
Well, I really, really appreciate the way that you articulate that, because that's how I describe accounting actually to somebody who doesn't know it. First of all, I also was in public accounting, and I think most of my family even assumed that I was just doing taxes all the time because in their
Yep.
mind, right, you
I
probably got
do my own taxes. I don't even know. I still get that. I'm like, I don't know.
I don't even do my own taxes. But the ability of accountants to use that historical data, and I feel like that to me becomes a backbone or a framework upon which other processes that can rely on that data and can rely on that acumen and can rely on that framework can significantly be enhanced. And to me, ESG feels like such a natural fit. I'm wondering then, to move on, in what specific ways then do you think accountants can help ensure the accuracy and credibility of this non-financial data and assist in that assurance process to ensure that the data is reliable, that it's transparent, and that people can trust it?
Yeah, so I think accountants have a unique ability to leverage a skill set we just talked about. And that leverage skill set is going to help infuse rigor and discipline around the reporting of the data. And one of the things accountants do fairly well is I like to call it connecting the dots, and seeing the end to end process of something from start to finish, cradle to grave. And that view that accountants take on the life cycle of a transaction from initiation to completion, all the risk points that happen along the data and its journey, how it might, go from source to maybe a transformation layer to a final repository to a reporting engine. These are very standard activities that an accountant follows on the financial side in terms of following through and threading through a transactional process and transactional data. And I believe that same concept really applies here. And then translating that information on the ESG side of saying, how do I get comfort over how we report our utility numbers or how we're reporting our CO2 emissions from certain sources? It really boils down to understanding the end to end process, understanding the risks that lie of the what could go wrong along that process that could impair the completeness or accuracy of validity of that data, and deploying controls to help mitigate those risks along that process that help give you that end-to-end reliability. And so that skill set and in deploying that risk and controls framework that we've so thoughtfully deployed well over 20 years, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, really, I think, is of harmony, of synergy and balance that I believe the ESG framework and those pursuing, the reporting side of it from a reliability perspective can, really work in tandem with your accounting professionals to bring that to light. So for me, that level of acumen around comfort and reliability over the data that we're using and the risk and controls around that become absolutely credible, manual and automated, of how you're going to go about that.
And do you see a clear path right now for ESG data gathering and review and transformation and ultimately reporting? Do you see a clear path today for that to get to the same point that we've enjoyed in accounting generally for decades and decades? I realize that's a loaded question a little bit there, but
Yeah, it's really loaded. The half glass full, Steve would say, absolutely, there's a clear path, there's a way to get there. But the reality is, it's pretty murky. I would argue the water is pretty gray on this one, and we're going to have to navigate that gray. And it goes back to, do we truly at this juncture in our journey as humanity and as a society, have we truly appreciated how all the data and all the information is collected, aggregated, changed, manipulated from the beginning to the end, especially when you think about scope 3 emissions, things that well are with outside the four walls of an organization's control. It's going to take some time for not only those individual organizations that are in that scope 3 area to kind of get their houses in order, for lack of a better word, in terms of the reliability of their own data, but also for, I would say, the accounting profession and those in the assurance profession to demonstrate a third party assurance professional standard that gives reliability of that information. Now, I say all of that with thinking through the idea that a lot of individuals who rely on the scope 3 data from their parties in themselves should themselves be dealing with scope 1 and 2, which is what they do internally. So one might view that as time evolves and organizations, whether you're a component manufacturer for a larger company, a supplier, or otherwise, you're theoretically going to, if time evolves correctly, get comfortable with your own emissions, scope 1 and 2, and then therefore that should build on itself to give comfort of someone else's scope 3. So I think it's a bit of a building block of activities, but it's, in my view, still very gray, in what the assurance standards could be, the public accounting firms and the standards they're going to follow to give assurance, and the methodologies we're going to follow. So I think we're going to deal with that gray water for a little bit before we kind of get to a clear place holistically. That's my view.
well, Steve, you're making my job very easy because I did want to get into assurance and those processes. Because one of the things that occurs to me, and even in my own experience, having, let's say you acquired an entity that wasn't subject to any kind of, external financial statement audit. Often, when you get auditors involved, internal and external, I would argue, that can be a little bit of a forcing function to kind of like force you to get up to that state that we were just talking about. So I'd love to get your take on how you see that playing out, given your experience both in internal and external audit. How do you see that again, whether it's a forcing function or however you want to define it, starting to maybe, I hate to say force, that makes it sound a little bit like negative, but pushing companies in that direction? Because if they don't, they're not going to get through the audit. They're not going to get the assurance that, again, back to that survey, everybody said that they wanted, and certainly you're not going to end up in the place where you thought or hoped that you would be.
Yeah, this is one of those moments where I like to tell people auditors are your friends. And they could really come to the table, whether it's your external auditor or an advisory firm that also works in the field of audit. These are going to be your best friends through this process. And what they're going to do is help give that lens and that light around kind of where your risk profiles are on the reliability and the completeness and accuracy of that data, and how you might take certain twists and turns, controls, and otherwise to mitigate that risk, whether it's input output controls when you may have no comfort over a black box system, as an example, and you just kind of all know what's going in and what's coming out. So, okay, how do we put some controls around that? And all these kind of different mechanisms of gaining some level of assurance. And may not always be a high level of assurance. And maybe we only need a moderate level of assurance, that you kind of have to go through that journey to kind of figure out where your risk profile is. And your auditors, external or advisory, are really best primed to kind of help partner with you to think through those risk profiles. And they've done this. This is, again, part of the DNA of what these firms and these organizations and these professional service organizations have done. I would tell everybody, don't go it alone. This is a team sport in many ways. And it's going to take, in my opinion, a community of people to get to we need to get to. I often call it ESGC, the C standing for community. And that community extends not only between finance and, of course, like workplace resources and engineering, but I would argue that community extends well beyond that to your advisors, your auditors, of course, all your suppliers. And unless we work together as a community, we're never really, in my opinion, going to really truly achieve that reliability and that assurance standard, because it creates accountability when you work together in that nature, in my mind.
I mean, that's exactly how I viewed it. I would say that some of my best, most successful work experiences and some of my worst, least successful work experiences have actually hinged on my relationship and partnership actually with external auditors. As you knew, 20 years in public accounting, sometimes that can be really adversarial, which is most unfortunate. Sometimes it can be just a beautiful partnership where you can, accomplish some amazing things. If I may, Steve, do you have any advice for teams, especially ESG teams, who are looking with maybe feeling a little bit like this is a bit of a daunting task to actually engage in that partnership? Any advice or counsel you would share with those teams on how they could partnership for the outcomes you shared?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, the word auditor is a strong word. You don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to be audited today. When you go on vacation and you're having dinner with somebody and you're like, hey, what do you do for a living? I'm an auditor. Like it's one of those kind of like, ooh, right. When I worked in 20 years in public accounting, I often would tell people, I viewed myself as a trusted advisor. Like that's kind of the role that I really wanted to play with my clients, because while I had a job to do and they had a job to do and we respected those lines, my objective was not only just to deliver the audit, it was candidly to be a trusted advisor to them on what we're auditing, and of course like maintain lines of independence, but be that trusted advisor. And I think your auditor could very much still do that for you within the confines of independence and other things. And the best advice on anyone kind of beginning the journey and looking at this mountain is kind of, something that my mom and dad taught me, very simple fact, when I was a little guy and I was looking at a big exam, or I was looking at, getting through college and a degree. They always said to me, hey, Steve, everyone can eat an elephant, just one piece at a time. And I think like that has served me very well, is start small, start with something that you can consume easily and kind of work your way out. You'll see that there's momentum and there's progress that builds very quickly, and you'll find that it'll come and you will see the progress and the elevation that will help get you to your goal. But if you look at it as one giant mountain, you're never going to get there. It's one piece at a time. And partner, work with your advisors, work with your auditors, work with your engineering teams, everybody has the same objective. Everyone has the same goals. Working as that community together is going to be absolutely critical. So don't go it alone. The community will have your back.
Well, terrific insights. And I would add that, at least insofar as I've experienced, but also observed, there's a bit of a flywheel effect that once you start to, take chunks out of the elephant, as it were, that momentum tends to build upon itself, because the successes that you've had often beget other successes, to where there really starts to be like massive movements in efficiency, in productivity, and honestly, in making an impact. Let's talk about another aspect of your experience. So prior to joining Cisco, as you mentioned, you spent 20 years at PwC, and I know you spent a lot of time in the IT, internal control kind of services space across a pretty diverse, as I understand, set of industries. So I'd love to ask you about the technology aspect of that, and how that can help and play a role in addressing the complexities of ESG and financial reporting, and maybe even what technologies you see today that are most promising.
So, I spent a lot of time, like you said, in the risk and control space, specifically in the technology space, as it relates to it. And we're not going to get there, let's be candid, without the reliability of appropriate technology for us to do this. For organizations such as Cisco, 50 plus $1 billion multinational, we have data coming in from a plethora of sources. And data is, truly the foundation of everything that we do to make decisions, to report information, to predict things, to respond to things. And so where we would view technology kind of intersecting is start with the basics, right? So there's a concept of information technology, general computer controls that has existed for many, many years. These tools and technologies that support your ESG metric reporting. Step one, put the basic IT general controls around those systems. I will highlight to you that, as you begin that specific journey, it'll be fairly illuminating the variation of systems that a company is using to collect data and report on that data. And I often refer to this as conceptually like grandma's basement. If you've ever been to your grandparents' house, you walk on the first floor, typically, it's all kind of put together quite nice. And then, they've likely lived in that place for decades, if not longer, and things end up in the basement. Right. And, it's not till maybe years later that you go into grandma's basement and you realize, whoa, there's a lot of stuff down here I didn't realize. And you begin uncovering that. And I think with ESG reporting and data collection, it's somewhat like analogous to walking around grandma's basement. Like on the financial reporting side, from a Sarbanes-Oxley perspective, we've been sitting there going, oh, we know what the key systems are, right? It's our general ledger or our payroll system, right? Pretty well boxed in. But when you start going through that end-to-end business process walkthrough and understanding where all that data is coming from, it's a lot like searching through grandma's basement. You're like, oh, wait, this is a small in-house built software sitting under someone's desk. Or, oh, wait, this is all just in a spreadsheet. Okay, who has access to that and how does it change? And so technology controls around where the data is coming from, the system is very basic. And then deploying other relevant controls, whether it's interface controls on the completeness and accuracy of data transmission, how data is being transformed, all of this stuff is going to play a role. And then let's not even get into AI, right? Because AI is going to then possibly continuously evolve. And how is data going to be transformed or evolved through the use of AI? So we've got a few hurdles there, but the key element I would take away from this is the technology landscape that we are living in the ESG space. I would argue is much more vast than the technology landscapes that we lived or are living in within a Sarbanes-Oxley framework. So don't underestimate the need and the value for your technology controls experts to partner with you through this journey, because the basic foundations of reliability come from those general computer controls.
Well, I need to add that I absolutely adore the grandma's basement analogy. As a kid, I loved grandma's basement. As a controller, it scared me to death. So, if you don't mind me asking, if I could, I would like to just get kind of a quick take on AI, specifically with respect to the controls. It's a conversation that we've been having quite a bit. And one of the things that I think about is, okay, how do you allow proper experimentation with AI by teams in order to get quick wins. It seems like even using today's capabilities, there's probably some gaps that you can kind of quickly close. But there is a very important broader governance question and control question. And I'm just curious, since you've been in the space for a long time, how are you thinking about AI?
Yeah, and I would use the word carefully. AI is one of those things where the curve of progress is will grow very quickly and it compounds. So as AI gets smarter, it's going to compound and compound and compound and compound and get to a crescendo where it's doing some really incredible things, but also possibly from a controls and risk mindset, some very scary things. So I would argue in our space, we're proceeding with caution, using AI in very controlled and boxed in spaces where we have an ability to understand exactly kind of its use and its user base of it. From a risk and controls perspective, we're going to apply those general controls that we all know about because they still foundationally apply. But then there becomes this concept of governance over AI and who's governing the algorithms and the just natural learning that the algorithms will create from the nature of AI and the governance over that. So where we're focused on it is deploying it thoughtfully and carefully using our general controls that we have, but also layering on that oversight and governance model to make sure that as AI evolves in its use and its breadth, that we are monitoring that from a risk management perspective. And it kind of goes to this concept that auditors have been deploying for many years, that the SEC and the PCAOB have been talking about in recent publications around ongoing risk assessment and entity level controls, thinking about the highest form of the COSO framework. I think that same concept can be readily applied to how you begin deploying and using AI. Tone from the top, starting on that governance on the way down. It's really a neat tool. We've used Chat GPT. We probably all wrote a poem from it at some point at this juncture. But it really does require that top-down risk-based governance approach, I think. And that's kind of the role and the rollout that we're taking with it.
And I think that ongoing risk assessments becomes really, really important for just how fast that is going to change. So I think that's spot on. Well, Steve, as we get ready to wrap up, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear just any perspectives that you might have on the future evolution of disclosures and ESG reporting generally. Are there any trends or changes you anticipate, and maybe what the impact of those might be to businesses, stakeholders, or investors?
Yeah, so a couple of things I'd highlight. I think one evolution that we're going to quickly see is I think the professional services industry, the public accounting firms, they're going to quickly evolve to standardizing how they provide third-party assurance to other constituents around the completeness and accuracy of data and the controls related to that. Obviously, a lot of us are familiar with SOC 1 and SOC 2 reporting. I think a lot of the principles around that will be applied, but I still think there's a lot of fine tuning. So I think one future step would be third party assurance and the evolution of third party assurance. So I think that's going to be a pretty critical cog in the wheel of things of getting comfort. The other thing I think that we're going to tend to see is connecting the tissue on doing all these wonderful ESG things back to the financial implications of it. So making sure that we not only are trying to do the right thing for humanity and meeting those goals, but how do we do that in a balanced, sustainable, and economic way? Because at the end of the day, we're still businesses and we still have to run, but there's this balancing act. So I think as ESG reporting and other ESG related metrics evolve over time, and that balancing of the two priorities, business and of course reporting, is going to continue to flux. And so I would argue that establishing your ESG controls or your framework and thinking, close the book, we're done, we're just going to kind of do this on repeat is not going to work. It goes back to the concept of risk assessment. The risks are going to change and the environmental conditions of our planet are going to change. We had a pandemic, of course, that we've all talked about that no one could have thought would have happened. That's changed the dynamics of how we operate as employees and how we operate as a community. So that ongoing evolution of risk assessment, I think, is going to just continue to play a key role in us evolving the ESG conversation to the next phase and then the future state.
Well, I think you're right. Steve Manocchio from Cisco, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a wonderful chat, and I appreciate the time.
Yeah, definitely appreciate your insights. And thank you to our audience for joining us on this episode of ESG Talk, brought to you by Workiva, the world's only unified platform for financial reporting, ESG, audit, and risk. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and please subscribe to see future episodes on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. You can also go to our website to watch sessions from Amplify 2023. And with that, we'll talk again soon. Thanks again, everyone.